TBF Insurance, Marine Risk Advisory for the world's most discerning owners. We don't just insure vessels, we protect legacies. Every journey, every crew member, every port, covered. You won't think about your policy until the day you're glad you did. Your captain has our direct line. So do you. 24/7 claim support worldwide. Tailored global coverage. Marine specialists. TBF Insurance.
In yachting, precision matters. So does trust. Trident Trust Marine Services provides expert support for yacht registration, ownership structures, and crew payroll, so you can focus on the journey ahead. With a global presence in the world's leading maritime jurisdictions, we ensure your vessel stays compliant and protected wherever it sails. Trusted by yacht owners for over 40 years. Visit tridenttrust.com/marine to learn more.
Bob, thanks for your time. Good to see you, brother. This is good stuff.
Thanks for the visit.
Wow, brand new offices.
Yeah.
I feel like we're one of the first people to walk into this place, right?
You are. We were on the island for a while, but we outgrew it. And this opportunity became available, so we went for it.
Wow, just right down the street from the Bend where you do so many gracious hosts.
And a block and a half from the show.
I love it. I love it. What a good spot to put yourself in. So welcome to Yachting USA. And I've been looking forward to this. I tell people that when I started this a year and a half ago, I made a list of people that I wanted to talk to. And I thought, okay, go big, and you're one of the names on the list. And here we are, 76 episodes in, and we're sitting here together. So again, thank you so much.
Well, I won't be offended by the fact that I'm number 76.
Well, yeah, that's a great number, actually.
It's a great number.
Absolutely.
It's 1776.
Yes.
I appreciate the honor of that number.
Well, it's what an honor to be here. So I'd like to kind of help people understand who and what I'm talking to. And Bob, you've got an amazing practice here, but let's go back a little bit because I love going back in history and then kind of moving to where we are today. Where did you start your love with the ocean? Where did that begin? I have to assume in your childhood at some point in place.
My father went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy during the Second World War.
Oh, wow.
And he was with MacArthur in the Philippines, and his ship was sunk in Manila Harbor 3 days after the conclusion of the Battle of Manila.
Wow.
So we go back to his sailing around the world when he was 19 and 20, to New Zealand, to India, to Egypt, across the North Atlantic and across the South Pacific in a typhoon. So my dad's history on the ocean was always with me. And then growing up, we had a boat when we lived in Gainesville. And then we were always on the rivers, exploring places, and we'd sail. He loved to sail. So we would sail the Chesapeake in a Morgan. And
Morgan.
And we just had a great time exploring things. And then later on, when I was a bit older, actually in college, we had a small boat in Guatemala. And we trailed that 17-footer all over the place. We took it into the Pacific Ocean, which was nuts. And we took it into the Caribbean up to Belize, which was also kind of nuts, but not quite as nutty.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of rivers and lakes in Guatemala, so we had it all over the place. And it was just a 17-footer with a 50 horse on it.
Wow.
But
that's perfect.
It was perfect. And I remember when we bought that boat, I asked the salesman, is 50 horse enough? He said, that's all the power you'll ever need, son. And it worked. I could slalom ski behind that thing. We could take it anywhere. But, we did some crazy things.
Wow. That's what, between your father's history, you're kind of lucky to be alive, aren't you?
I am. And then eventually, I had a boat when I lived in Miami. It was like a 24-foot Chris Craft.
Right.
And then I ended up with a Bertram Sportfish, which I had up here in Jupiter. And we took that baby all over the place. I got it to explore the Bahamas, and I took it as far as Crooked Island.
Wow.
And so we got around with that thing.
Sure did.
And it's the best way to explore the Bahamas, right? Which I tell people is the closest thing to paradise on earth, right?
We are so fortunate to be in South Florida, so close to the Bahamas. I was just telling Tristan that we're getting what's called Bimini days coming here in the next week or two. The seas are flattening out, and We take our boat over there occasionally.
It's just incredible. And when you can go south, and the Abacos are kind of civilized, the Exumas have gotten civilized, but when you're down there, Cat Island, when you're down there at Long Island, when you go down to Crooked Island, and when you go to Mayaguana, it's like nobody is there.
You're primitive.
And I love it.
Yeah, I bet you do.
It's the closest thing to heaven on earth.
Wow. Imagine that.
At least for me.
Well, I tell you what, Bahamas are a treasure. And for those of us that have that blessing to be able to visit occasionally.
It's a privilege.
Yeah, absolutely true. You graduate from Notre Dame?
Yeah, I went to Notre Dame Law School. My first year there was Joe Montana's last year.
Oh, wow.
So I got to see a fantastic bit of football.
I bet you did.
And I love the tradition of the place.
Yeah.
My father's high school coach had been All-American at Notre Dame. And so I grew up with it, with the fight song and the whole thing. But I went to college here in Florida. And then, through the grace of God, got to Notre Dame.
Wow. Wow. Nice education.
It was fantastic.
I bet. And that got you into law then?
What got me into law really was thinking about some injustices that I had seen. And I wanted to make the world a better place. And I figured, at first I thought I'd be a journalist and write about them.
Yeah.
But one of my friends, who just died a couple of months ago, he was a U.S. congressman eventually, he told me, Bob, journalism's great, but do you want to write about the news or do you want to make the news? That's what he told me. And he went to law school and I followed him.
Okay.
And then, fortunately, I got to work for a law firm that did more work in the cruise industry than anybody else did. And I got to go with them. I went to Dominican Republic, to Grenada, to Haiti. I went all over the place. And at one point, being South Florida, our firm had a wealthy client with a couple of big Hatterses that had some warranty issues. I'm talking about eons ago. And I dealt with those. And when I left to set up my own firm, Bertram had just been acquired out of bankruptcy by an Italian group. And they needed someone who knew about warranties and knew about the ocean a little bit. And eventually I kind of wormed my way in there. They were working with a huge firm and I had just left a big firm.
Right.
And I started doing work for them. And fortunately for me, the Furry Group bought them. And since I had already done warranties and dealer agreements for Bertram, that's exactly what they needed as they expanded into the United States. And after that, as executives left Furry Group, as things evolved, people called me from different places, and we did work for other builders. And then we were representing sellers of boats, makers of boats. And then in 2008, the economy kind of crashed, remember?
You think? The light switch went off.
Right. And so no new boats were sold for a long time. Mm-hmm. But I looked at my competitors and they were still doing deals.
Right.
But they were in the brokerage side of things. And so I got into the brokerage side of things in about 2010, 2011. And I got more and more involved in the IYBA. And because that's where the brokers were. And I realized, if I can handle the sale of a boat from a manufacturer, I could handle the purchase of a boat. And I invested as much as I could in getting to know people in the industry and also in learning more, a little bit less about manufacturing and more about the requirements on the legal side of buying boats, because it is different.
It is, no question. So it sounds to me like you use the moniker, you branded yourself as the yacht lawyers. And
well, you know what? That was an interesting story. I was in Cannes. I started going to Cannes about 20 years ago. And I used to think of that as kind of a luxury thing, right? Who would go to Cannes?
Right.
And maybe it was 16 years ago, I think. It was 2008, and somewhere around there. But then eventually I realized that Cannes is where the production boat business is headquartered. And at least that's their most important show. And I just got more and more into the buying and selling of boats. And Cannes was a fantastic place as a bridge because it's a production show, right? And I got to meet more and more brokers, especially the ones doing international deals. So there at Cannes, I met a guy who goes by the Yacht Guy. You know the Yacht Guy, Alex Jimenez?
Yes, Alex and I have become friends over the last year or so.
Yeah, so Alex is a fantastic guy. He used to be a truck driver.
Great story, isn't it?
And he wanted to do an Instagram thing about RVs. And he was in the bookstore and he saw the yacht magazines and he looked around. There wasn't any Instagram stuff on yachts, so he started it. And I met him, and at that time he had about 300,000 followers, which was a lot. And I said, if he's the yacht guy, why can't I be the yacht lawyer? So I decided to put that in Instagram. And for a while, we used to put a picture of every yacht that I did a transaction on, or my firm did, and I was involved somehow.
Yeah.
But eventually, that's a full-time job, right? And I just, after I got about 5,000 followers, I left it there. But it seemed like our logo used to be integrating law into business, which is more general. And the reality is, we do a ton of work with yachts. I mean, we do the buying and selling of yachts, and we do the work for the factories and for the distributors and the brokers, for the lawyers for IYBA and USSA.
Right.
And so it just fit. That's what we do. I mean, it excludes other business, right? Because we're not the jet lawyers. And we are really corporate lawyers, business lawyers in the yacht industry.
Right. You've got a niche.
Yeah.
And this industry is all about niche. I mean, it is so unique. It takes time and a certain skill set to even understand the industry or speak the language.
It takes a long time.
It does. And then to build a reputation and
it really helped me when I bought that Bertram, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because before that, I was always, dealing with warranty claims. And when you buy a boat, you say, hey, well, maybe that should work a little better. And so it gave me a great deal of empathy for buyers.
That's right.
The purchase of a yacht is a complex thing. And unless you have knowledge and you're sophisticated, you have to have the right expectations, right? Because having that big piece of machinery on the water and moving it around pretty fast with, air conditioners and plumbing systems and electrical systems and communication systems, it is complicated.
Bob, I tell people all the time, because you hear comparisons between yachts and aircraft, other items, high value. And, having been in manufacturing myself for 35 years and then running a yacht management company for a couple of years, I've seen all sides of this, and it is one of the most complex machines other than perhaps spacecraft.
I agree with you. People compare it with, private aviation, but you don't live on a jet.
No. And the jet gets parked in a building, usually.
Right. It gets parked in a building.
And everyone goes home.
And even on a small sport fish like mine, there's two heads. There's air conditioning. There's,
probably there's a stabilizer on the boat. And
there's everything.
Water maker and it's
a fuel spinner and
all that
stuff.
Ship systems.
Exactly. It is much more complicated.
Yeah.
And it's good to know that as a lawyer, because what I found out was there weren't other lawyers who had boats. I mean, one thing is to have, a center console. But one thing is have a bona fide yacht.
Right.
And it was a bona fide little yacht. I mean,
it still works the same way and has the same challenges. And I think you'd find too, I'm sure in your practice, you've come to this realization, not all yachts are built the same.
Not at all.
No,
I've totally come to that realization.
Yeah.
But I remember then going into the marina on the south end of Long Island. And I showed up in my boat, which I thought was a pretty big deal, a sport fish. And the lady at the hamburger stand said, "Oh, you just came in on the little sport fish, right?"
Oh man, that's a killer for the ego, right?
Yeah,
You're sitting here thinking.
But they aren't. And fortunately, in our law firm, we have a guy who used to be a yacht captain, right?
That helps.
Yeah, he was a competitive captain on a competitive fishing boat, right? And on a 65 Viking. So he knows things inside and out. And he was kind of a relief captain on the boss's 2-1-12 Westports.
Okay.
So it's just, we have a unique kind of perspective on the industry.
Perspective is exactly what it is, because until you're on the water and use this stuff and you experience firsthand how it works and sometimes how it doesn't work.
That's exactly right. Because a lot of times you're in the middle of nowhere and something doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you got to learn how to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because you just touched on exactly what I was going to talk to you about, which is the role of a maritime attorney in yacht transactions, particularly the buying transactions. And, where's the starting point? And someone comes and says, I want a yacht, and it's like, oh, I'm just going out on a limb here and assuming, well, yeah, what do you want? A motor yacht, a sailing yacht? You want something for your family, or is you and your buddies going out, or is this going to be a party boat, or, are you going to charter it? Are you going to use it private? I mean, you just got a whole punch list of everything to go down.
There are a lot of
Too many
things to go
choices.
down.
So many
And
choices.
I would say that where we are now, we're mostly dealing with motor yachts, and we're mostly dealing with large motor yachts. We're mostly dealing with what I would call what conventionally was called a super yacht, 80 feet and above.
Yep.
And we're mostly dealing with boats even bigger than that.
This with what's happened in this industry,
Right.
yes, absolutely.
We're above 100 feet, 110 feet, 120 feet is kind of our starting point for
Right.
most deals.
Right.
Right. And at that point, if you're lucky, you're dealing with a person who's owned a decent sized boat before, so they know the questions to ask. But oftentimes, especially in the world that as it is now, where sometimes fortunes are made very quickly, or someone made a bundle of money over time, but they're in Montana or North Dakota or Iowa, but they moved to Florida, right? Or they have a second house in Florida and they want a boat. So I had a guy whose first boat was a Fed ship.
Yeah.
Right. And he didn't have any idea what to ask. And these people are some incredibly successful business people. And they don't know that one particular clause in a contract means so much, right? And sometimes they get impatient. You just have to be patient with them and walk them through the process. And they have no idea of the complexity of chartering a yacht in the Mediterranean.
Oh my God, you're just going down so many rabbit holes. I mean, in my own experience working with high net worth people who've come in to buy a boat, the expectations that have to be established, particularly, and this is where it really gets interesting, if they're going to come in and sit down and say, I want to build a boat.
Oh,
and now you've got to walk them down that whole process and set expectations on, how much time do you have?
Well, and ideally, they're wealthy enough that they have someone who takes care of it for them.
That's right.
Right? They've got a CFO or a family office, somebody that deals with as many decisions as possible, because otherwise it will drive you nuts.
Yeah, management company is good for that.
100%. You want a project manager to begin with. And if you don't have a project manager, you're going to go nuts.
Yep, no doubt about it. And this is the message I try to pass along to those who will listen. The statistics about high net worth people that actually own yachts is mind-blowing. Something like less than 6 or 7% of those that have the money could afford to actually do. So we're working with a very small demographic, of 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000 high net worth people that actually are actively engaged in buying and operating and using boats. And we're really good at pissing those people off. And, when you push them out of your industry, the impact is tangible. I mean, because you may be lucky and they come back to charter a boat, but, if they're one and done in buying a boat or owning a boat, that's expensive for our industry.
And things can go south quickly. I mean, a super experienced captain can run a boat aground.
Oh, yeah.
I just had a situation with a super experienced boat owner, and the boat was delivered. The next day, it was run aground. And it's enough to drive you nuts, because you also have all the crew issues, right? And as you know, nothing is harder to manage than humans, right? So in any business, the hardest part is being the orchestra conductor.
That's right.
Right? And a big yacht is just another orchestra. So you're running your whole personal life, which you have to be the conductor. You have to run at least one business, assuming you're still in business. If you've sold your business, you have to run, investments.
Your assets, right?
Right. And so this is just, you just bought another orchestra. And you better have, a good first violin, or what do they call him? The guy who, the number 2 guy in the orchestra is the first violin.
Yeah, that's
the
right.
concert master, they call him.
That's right.
Otherwise, it's cacophony is the word.
Cacophony is a wonderful adjective to describe exactly what could happen when it doesn't go well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where I brought up yacht management before. I'll bring it in again, that there are so many moving parts, and it's the crew interface. I've interviewed owners and I've interviewed captains, and I've had so many of these conversations. When you have the right crew with the right culture, it's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is.
But it only takes one. It just takes one bad apple. I don't even want to use the word bad apple. Don't think that is generous enough.
It's an instrument that is playing off key.
Thank you. Perfect. And So if you ever go to a rock and roll concert, all of a sudden you see the guitarist throw his guitar to a roadie and grabs another one that's tuned.
Yes.
It's ready to go, right? And because he's hearing it, he's realizing that, okay, this is not quite right. And, and what I've been noticing, and here's some kudos to an industry leader that I really respect, Graham Lord, who's gone down a path to start a business that actually takes the approach of leasing crew, so that when you have a crew put together and let's say it goes out of tune a little bit, it's not that maybe that chief engineer is necessarily a bad guy or gal, but maybe just doesn't fit the culture or work well with the captain or whatever that looks like. And so you're able to do this and take that person off, put them on another program that maybe works better for that person, and keep that crew running well and culturally doing well, so the owner has a good experience.
That's exactly right.
And
the owner having a good experience is the key to everything.
That's right. And that's where we as an industry have to show up and pay attention.
And it means no detail can be ignored.
No.
None.
No.
And it also happens in the buy, right? In the buy. Somebody's showing a boat to someone. It requires a hypercritical eye so that after the acquisition, nobody is surprised, right? So it's always a tension between selling, or you want the person to buy, and not overemphasizing something, because you can always find something wrong, and making sure that something that's important is pointed out.
So it's a matter of my curiosity, because I like approaching these conversations with some curiosity. It's a transactional attorney representing a buyer, and he's found this boat and he really likes it. And you start making arrangements for survey and everything that should happen. And hopefully it's a buyer survey, not a seller survey. There's a difference. What happens when they start asking about registration? Because there's so many choices and there's so many challenges with crew and charter or not to charter and zones of operation and expectations. Excuse me. How do you approach that with a client? How do you start that process with identifying how to register that vessel most appropriately?
Well, it depends really on the client's intentions, their short-term intention and their long-term intentions. There are different registries that are a little bit more accommodating than others. And some boats, if you're doing a new build, some will have a harder time complying with the registry requirements of one registry or the other. And it doesn't really matter that much unless ultimately you're making such an investment in something that you want it to be able to charter in the Mediterranean. If you want it to be able to charter in the Mediterranean, you build to a certain standard.
Right.
But if you don't really care, right, or if it's not going to be chartering in the Mediterranean all the time, then you don't really care. And a lot of people think they'll charter a little bit, and they're not really concerned about what the value of the boat's going to be or the marginal difference, right? Maybe it's, who knows what percentage, 5%, 10% difference. They're not even really thinking about that. Very few people actually buy a boat with the intention of immediately putting it into charter. I find that people who do that are just generally not that experienced. Their expectations of charter income, especially when they're playing a new boat that doesn't have a charter history, you have to be really knowledgeable to buy a boat and put it into charter.
No question.
And buying a boat with a charter history, because boats, sometimes you need to drop a lot of money into them and take them out of charter service for a long time before you can put them back in.
I hope everybody listening just listen to you, because I have got to tell you, in my own experience, no true words. Really, you have to make the investment if you're going to, because when your boat finally goes into charter and you're expecting revenue from charter and you're building reputation for charter, dropping out the air conditioning system, having the crane not work, there's just a litany of things that will end a charter just like that.
There's 100 things that can go wrong.
Yep.
And, we've dealt with a lot of, we had a case once where somebody claimed that they got food poisoning from the boat. Of course, they'd eaten off the boat. And then they ate on the boat. Nobody else got food poisoning. And, you know, some people drink and some people have medications, and you have no idea.
No.
But that thing ended up in the London Maritime Arbitrators Association.
Wow.
A dispute over the refund of the charter.
Oh,
My
wow.
point is that so many things can go wrong.
Right.
That's why when you go on the yachts, everything is perfect. The standard is perfection.
It has to be.
It absolutely has to be. When I was young and my father told me about the concept of ship shape, everything had to be ship shape.
Yep.
Ship shape is the best shape. It's perfect all the time.
Right.
And
the bright work is bright, the brass is polished, and everything below decks is ready to go.
All right. And that's why one of my dad's favorite musicals was HMS Pinafore, right? About the First Lord of the British Admiralty.
That's right.
He polished all the handles on the big front door or whatever it was, polished all the handles on the doors. He sharpened all the pencils
to make it ship shape.
And he mopped all the floors, and he polished on the handle on the big front door in that law firm that he went to right before he became Lord of the Admiralty. Anyway.
That's a great segue. But you just touched on something that I was wanting to put on the table with us, and that is we've been talking about transactional law and transactional business, which is so important. But then there's always that litigation piece of it, the things that happen. And as I was getting ready for this conversation, and I'm looking at just what's in the last year, what's happened. And I brought some notes just because I wanted to make sure I was accurate. Talk about being able to stay busy. Of course, the report that just came out regarding the Italian findings, they're still arbitrary because the Italian authorities haven't released anything and the boat's not actually been seen yet. But, you know, the freaking internet blew up this past week because of these reports coming out. The partial sinking of, this is right down in Miami, that Tecnamar Lamborghini yacht, you know, with 32 to 34 influencers on board that boat, 64-foot boat. Geez, wonder what could possibly go wrong. Really close to this one, a friend of mine was
It reminds me of the videos you see of people going out haul over.
I love that. You can make a whole practice just around haul over inlet, no question about it. The HCB tender, a real wild, associated with Loon down in St. Bart's last December. A horrible situation there. And the Clearwater Ferry collision, 37-foot recreational vessel, Jeffrey Knight, who's had a history of having bad experiences on the water, you know, took the life of a gentleman and left the scene. Yeah, I mean, so I bring those up just because boats are on the water, dynamically operated, things happen. At some point in time, you're going to have situations that are going to require representation, and this is another aspect of your practice, I'm sure.
It is. And what just happened with a Mexican cadet ship.
Yeah, wasn't that crazy?
Yeah. Something got stuck. And that happens with yachts every once in a while. Now,
Motor Yacht Go down in St. Martin a couple of years ago.
Probably something got stuck. But sometimes it doesn't get stuck. It's almost like, you know, I drive a Tesla, right? And sometimes you push it to go forward and you think it went forward, but it's still in reverse. And you got to be careful. And you don't know if it's human error or it's not.
Right.
But what's clear is that when things go wrong on the water, the consequence can be fatal. And so we deal with issues like that from time to time, especially with really fast boats, right? Fast boats, people like to go fast, and it's dangerous to go fast. I mean, it's insanely dangerous to go fast. And people are just overconfident. And what we deal with is sometimes people aren't happy with their boats, or they think that there's some sort of a defect. And usually they don't know what they're talking about. They're just not familiar. They think that a yacht is going to operate like, you know, a car, right? Like a Mercedes or a Rolls Royce or something.
Yeah.
They don't, it's different. They're not built that way. They're not production things usually. And even if they are, they're just much more complicated. And we deal with commission disputes as well. There's a lot of money on the table with commissions. And there's different interpretations of, you know, who did what, who introduced or what's sufficient. And, you know, on a big boat, the amount of a commission is so big.
It's real money.
And and it impacts the yard's bottom line. And so they want to make sure that the brokers are really helping, and the brokers saying, well, look, I introduced them to you, that's enough. So there's this constant tension there.
Right. How much did you actually do to earn?
Right, and the law it's pretty clear, but it's not perfectly clear.
Yeah.
And then the facts, sometimes, there's countless situations where you and I are looking at the same thing and we see something a little different, right?
That's not uncommon.
No, it's not uncommon at all, and especially when there's a pile of money involved. And so we get involved in those disputes.
Didn't you help write EBA's contracts for buying and selling for the brokers?
In fact, the backstory is this, that when my client acquired Allied Marine, I had never represented a brokerage house before. Remember, my background's in manufacturing.
Right.
My client acquired Allied Marine, and that's when I first had to deal face-to-face with the old Florida Yacht Brokers Association contract. And it left a lot to be desired. It was basically a handshake with a few rules written on it. But, the values of the boats got to be so big that we ended up writing a new contract for Allied that basically crossed the T's and dotted the I's. And of course, there was resistance among the brokers because nobody else was using anything but the FYBA agreement. But I remember specifically saying, unless we change this, you're going to get sued and you're going to lose because of this and this. And then later on, one of their competitors got sued and they lost because of this. And 2 days later, I got a call from the IYBA saying, hey, you think you could take a look at our contracts? And it's not easy, but I was fortunate. I had a background. I'd been the principal lawyer for a residential brokerage house and a commercial real estate brokerage house. So before I got into yachting, I had done a lot of brokerage work.
And these are high value, high transactional.
Yes, commercial real estate and very expensive homes. So I basically looked at the FYBA agreement and I looked at commercial real estate agreement or residential. Because a yacht is a combination between commercial and residential and maritime. And I looked at those documents and put together something that I thought worked. And eventually, the IYBA decided to put together a committee of very experienced brokers. And the idea was we need to go beyond small yachts to really big yachts too. And so at that point, we obviously integrated Rob Moss into the project because no one has more huge boat experience than Rob. And we refined the document into one that is now the IYBA agreement. And we did the IYBA listing agreement and the IYBA trading agreement. We kind of brought a professionalization I would say, a more sophisticated approach to dealing with high value items.
Yeah. Well, this industry started in some ways as a cottage industry.
Yes.
And I still have conversations with people who even question that it's an industry. It's an industry, but
it's a big industry.
Yeah.
But I remember I met a guy who worked with Camper Nick years and years ago. And he told me that so I think Bertram brought a 50-footer into the Fort Lauderdale show, a 50-foot sport yacht. That was the star of the show. It was the biggest boat by far. And, where have we come from?
Well, the Chris Craft Roamer, 50-foot Roamer, that was like, that was the bee's knees of big yachts way back when.
Yeah.
And when I started in this industry, I remember being on the docks in Sarasota, and I walked on the dock, and there was a 70-foot Hatteras. And I looked up at the bow, and I looked at that boat, and I thought, wow.
How could you ever build a boat bigger than that?
Yeah, exactly. That's huge. That was in the early 80s, mid 80s. It's changed a lot since then.
It sure has.
Going back, though, to the early 80s, what a great segue. Thank you. Because we're going to talk about shipbuilding. And there's some things happening with our current federal government that are interesting. The state of Florida is interesting. But I set the stage a little bit. And those that follow and listen to this show have heard me say this before. Go back into the early mid 80s, North America, even through the 90s, there was over 45 shipyards in North America building what I call crew serve vessels, 75, 80 foot and larger. Of that 45, 46, you could argue the number, but it's right around there. 30, 32 building over 100 foot. Imagine that in North America.
It's crazy.
You look at what the Denisons did, and the whole fleet of the Browards that that are still on the water, and everything that was coming out of the Pacific Northwest. And it was just incredible time to be building boats in North America. Today, depends on how you categorize cruise service vessels, but I would go out on a limb and say, if you could find me more than 5,
You can't even find 5.
right,
You know?
truly, legitimately, right?
No, I think I can only think of 2.
Well, I can help you with that. You got Westport and Delta both actively building and delivering, boats right now. Pat Healy's got his 93, 94, and his 80 Sportfish. They're cruise service vessels. That counts, and he's successful in making money. So kudos to him.
The big Vikings, but the biggest Vikings now are, they're not monsters.
No, they're not.
For us,
Right.
they're monsters, right?
Berger's got one.
Yeah, Berger's got one.
And that's a 55 meter. And I think Crescent Custom Yachts has got one. They've just started a steel hull. That's it. That's pretty. So.
And Westport's production, I don't think is anywhere near what it was.
No,
right?
these shipyards are hurting, and that kind of ties 2 things together, because we're going to talk about tariffs. We're also going to talk about what happened to the industry and what's happening now with the Ships for America Act and its implications it might have for the yachting industry. So, so we lost a lot of shipbuilding to incompetent shipbuilding. Well, there's shipbuilders who just went out of business because they couldn't figure out how to make money and cost their vessels, and they sold at a loss. You can only do that for so long. Or that old adage, well, I'll get the deposit on the next one to finish this one, and eventually we'll catch up, right?
Yeah, no, that happened. Certainly it happened in the big sport fish market.
It happened in the motor yacht market too, more than once in multiple locations. And so we lost it there. We lost it to competitive pressures. Taiwan we started sending American boat building know-how through yacht management and project managers to Taiwan, and Horizon and Kaohsiung and Ocean Alexander all got better, and they started building boats that people wanted to buy. China started building boats. They're coming out of Brazil,
Malaysia.
They're coming out of Malaysia and Italy. I mean, look what Italy's.
Italy is king of the world,
no doubt about it, and deservedly
production
so.
boats, sure,
right. So we've lost it all,
and the Dutch, of course.
Well, but that's a different category.
Yeah, but there is.
I don't think they stole anything from us.
That's
steal,
right. They didn't steal.
They earned every one of those with good technology, good standards, perfect yachts, essentially. So
the Italians didn't steal the style from us, because
no.
Yeah, Italian style is amazing.
In fact, the takeaway there is, if you looked at the success that Lazara had when they came out with their boat 20 years ago. It was, look at the name,
right?
But Dick Lazara, in his brilliance in styling and design work, came up with a boat that Americans wanted to buy.
He did, and you know what I think the Italians mostly did? They stole the buyers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
That's what they did.
Absolutely.
They stole the buyers, but not steal. They were able to figure out a way to build boats that looked good and people liked at a price that made them money.
Yep.
Right. No. And we lost that in America because, in a couple of ways, production costs are hard, but we also did not commit to style, right? Even if you look at the boats that are built in America right now, with the exception, I think Berger can do anything they want. They're not building many boats, right?
They're building one boat right now.
Exactly. And the one before that my client bought, I think it's called North Star.
Beautiful boat.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
But it was designed by Louis DeBasto.
That's right.
Right. And he can design anything. He has style. But if you stay with the conventional, traditional things that you and I grew up with, right, at some point, people want a different style.
That's so true.
And there's a reason why, Mercedes switches styles, right? And there's a reason why all car makers switch styles. People want something new. And the Italians were amazing at doing
They
that.
continue to.
Yeah.
I walk the docks and I see new boats coming over, and it's just like, wow, there's another one, and there's another one. And it's not really technology. The boats pretty much come out of Italy working similarly to the previous iterations. But it is the visuals, it's the windows or the spaces they've created up in the forepeak of the boat, that used to be fully enclosed, now they're open. little things like that I've noticed that it's like, wow, that you see that boat sitting next to another boat in the marina and that one stands out, something that simple. So yeah, it's good design, and good design drives market.
Yeah. But you were talking about, what happened to the American yacht building industry. And, it's people don't realize that little things take a whack, right? Because there's this common prejudice that people have against the rich, right? And so they want to put a luxury tax on things.
Oh, that was devastating.
It was absolutely devastating. And the thing is, all this rhetoric that sounds like egalitarian, it just causes people to lose jobs because the factory closes and all those people are unemployed. And all the people who worked for the boat owners are unemployed. And the people who service the boats are unemployed. It's a disaster. There's a historic, tension.
I know.
I think since the beginning of time.
Oh, yeah.
Someone works hard and they accumulate things and they buy things and they put other people to work. And then somebody comes along and gets jealous and says, well, that's not fair. Well, sometimes things aren't fair, right? But it's generally speaking true that if you work hard, you make money. And you can either put the money in the bank and save it to give to your kids or, give away to people, or you can buy stuff.
Right.
So they criticize the person who has, 2 vacation houses, one in the mountains, one on the beach, and they're ready. Hey, but guess what? It takes a lot of employers or, contractors to build those houses. And the people who work for the electric company and the water company and the paint company, everybody lives.
And Bob, if you look at what it costs and the man hours it took to build any one of these estates there in Palm Beach, and compare that to the man hours that goes into building one of these 50, 60 meter yachts, it is way more man hours in boat building. It's all handwork. There's no automations. There's no assembly lines. There's no robotics that's putting these things together. There are people.
Each yacht is a work of art.
They are.
And if you look at the old palazzos, right, where the Michelangelo was painting or somebody was painting all the murals and all that stuff, every yacht that is really a yacht, a big yacht.
Yeah.
The amount of, it's really a work of art.
They are.
It's a combination of machinery and art. And, but
it's the gift that keeps on giving too, because not only are you basically transferring wealth from the high net worth individual that's commissioned the purchase of this yacht and turning that into man hours and turning that into revenue that's being paid out in paychecks and all the benefits and supporting the communities and everything around these shipyards and what's going on there. But the vessel gets delivered and you hire crew. Some of these yachts will hire 20, 30, 40, 50 crew.
Yeah.
I was on a new Fed ship in Amsterdam last November, accommodations for, I think it was 68 crew.
That's a big boat.
That was a 119 meter hydrogen.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest boats in the world.
Yeah,
but
stunning boat.
Even if we go down to a much less expensive boat,
you still have that.
Let's assume you have 10 crew. That's still amazing. And all the boats have crew on rotation.
That's right.
Right? And so you've got a couple of different captains, you got a couple of different engineers, and then you have the yacht manager, and then you have the payroll manager, you have the crew manager, and then you have all the people that service every detail of that boat.
That's right. Every piece of equipment, every
and the people that
system.
manage the marinas, and the people that manage the fuel providers,
you're paying,
and the food providers.
You're paying for dockage everywhere you go, 365 days a year.
Right, and you're paying taxes all over the place.
And when that yacht pulls into a harbor and the passengers come off, the guests come off, and they go to the restaurants and they go to the shows. And
it's unbelievable.
It is a gift that keeps on giving. And so every time I hear people disparaging the high net worth people that are buying these vessels, I just ask that question. What would you rather they do with the money they have? Because they're going to have that money. And
if they did nothing, if they did nothing or just lived in their palace in some forest, it'd be
no benefit to our society.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that brings me to this issue of, benefiting society and what the industry itself can do to show the world its heart. Because every yacht owner is probably a philanthropist. The factories have their own charitable programs. The owners of the factories have their own philanthropies. But there's a project going around right now. It's called Mercy Ships. You may have heard of them.
I've heard of them. It's a wonderful organization. They go around the world, and they're just an amazing organization.
Well, they have 2 ships right now off the coast, the east coast and west coast of Africa. They're hospital ships.
Yep.
They're the largest private hospital ships in the world. The other ones, governments have a few of them.
Right. But these are ships that people can come on and get surgeries and get their eyes.
Yes, their legs, everything, tumors, and they're served. All of them are manned entirely by volunteers. In fact, if you want to go be a doctor or a crew member, you pay. You actually pay the cost of being there. A couple $100 for the week or whatever. Or I don't know how long it takes. I haven't been on one yet, but I want to go.
Yeah, okay.
I've been invited, but
That's
my wife hasn't. I got to get my wife on board.
Come on.
I mean, these people are really saints. They go to Sierra Leone,
third world country.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have an event in Cannes on September. This year.
Okay.
September 10, the Wednesday of the show at the Carlton. The Carlton's a fantastic hotel. It's where Grace Kelly and Cary Grant stayed when they were filming To Catch a Thief.
Right.
I think it might have been the place where Prince Rainier met Grace Kelly.
Wow.
And we're going to do it in the Grand Ballroom there. And it's going to be a benefit, the first gala benefit in the yacht industry to support the industry supporting a charitable thing, which has to do with the sea and also has to do with the most underprivileged, on the earth.
Bob, I love that. I talk all the time about doing well for others. It's anybody that communicates with me, that you'll see that's in my signature, because I think it's that important that you keep that out in front, that we all have that opportunity. But when you have an opportunity to be able to organize something as profound as this, it's a lot of credit due. Thank you. That's big.
Well, there's several people involved in this project, obviously. It's too big for one person to do. But it's really a labor of love. And really, it's an opportunity. Rick, you know this. We're just on the earth for a little while.
It's finite.
And as the Beatles said,
the love you take is equal
love you make.
Absolutely. I love that.
So this is about, we're in the yacht business, right?
Yeah.
But we're also humans, and it's not just about the money.
No,
it's about making the world a better place.
Yeah, the give back part.
The give back part. We can help make the world a better place. That's why I love this industry, frankly. It creates so much employment.
Yeah.
And when these crazy guys come around and yell and protest, I want to be able to say, look,
yeah,
we want to make the world a better place, and show them a film about what we're doing and invite them to Sierra Leone and Togo with us.
Right. Yeah.
And if they come and throw paint on a boat, I want to say, come with us.
Right. Yeah.
We're all in it together. It's kind of like in the yacht industry. I'm not an enemy of the lawyers that I negotiate against, or that, our lawyers sue them. I'm not their enemy. I'm on their team.
Right. You're pulling the same direction.
Right. I'm negotiating for a new build with one of the yards. We're still on the same team. We're talking about a commission. We're on the team. We want it all to work. Now, you have to defend the interest of your client, of course.
Yeah, that's your priority.
That's your priority. But notwithstanding that, we're all on the same team. And it's not just that we're on the same team with those in the industry or with our customers. We're on the same team with those eco-freaks and those misguided, communist types.
Right. We're breathing the same air and drinking the same water and want the same thing.
And they're idealists, right? And they don't see the complexity of the world. But still, I want to bring them on board to help the most helpless in the world.
And education is the best way to do that. If you can get that in front of the people to understand what it is we do and why we do it and where the benefit comes from, you occasionally get to that aha moment. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because we talk about, high net worth people, big yachts and things that, they can do. But I also distill it down to the everyday you and I, I think it's unlikely, unless this program goes Joe Rogan, which, never know, I've channeled it all the time. Go Joe. I don't see myself, stepping into that space where I'll have my own big yacht. But, the 32-foot boat that I've got that I enjoy and put so much energy and time and love into, I also try to use it as much as I can for doing well for others. We go out and we support Nova Southeast University and take their grad students out and help them get on the water to do surveys, which they otherwise couldn't afford to do. I've got these that I wear, which represent 3 trips across with Piper's Angels Foundation. My wife had cystic fibrosis and passed from that in 2018. And my kids and I really get behind this because this is all about bringing awareness and raising funds for kids with cystic fibrosis. And we actually escort paddleboarders from Bimini all the way across to Lake Worth Pier, 84 miles.
That's a really cool thing.
That's a really cool thing. Leaving Bimini at midnight.
And you know what's interesting too? You mentioned the 34-footer, and we had a 17-footer when I was a kid.
Right.
And we took it everywhere, out in the ocean and the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean. We were nuts.
That's
but
right.
Here's the thing. These incredibly beautiful yachts, they go anywhere. And when you're on one, you feel like, what happened? You died and went to heaven.
Right.
But when do you have the most fun? You have the most fun where you're on the smallest possible boat.
That's right.
As close to the water or in the water.
Right.
So you can actually jump in with, a mask and a snorkel.
And experience
or bring it right up to the beach.
That's right.
And, when you're there and you see the dolphins jumping up close or,
So let me paint this picture for you, Bob. You've left Bimini at midnight and you've been paddling now for 7 hours, and the sun's coming up over your shoulder on the east, and you're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf Stream, and you just stop and you put your paddle down and you see my boat, your escort, a few meters ahead of you, and you just watch this magnificent day begin, in the middle of nowhere.
You know what? It's like the first day of creation.
Yeah. Yeah.
When the earth was created, that's how you feel.
Right. Because you're living in that moment, and you're at that time. I mean, your hands in the water, and you've had that bioluminescence, coming off the board and the paddle as you're paddling through it. And it's God's magnificence being manifest right there. It is gorgeous.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's why we are blessed to be able to work in an industry that takes us close to nature, right?
Yeah.
Now, you may be in a mega gazillionaire yacht, but you get away from civilization. I mean, in this palace, right? But you still get away.
That's
right.
And
when you're on the boat, you are going to get in the water, and you are going to be close to the water, and you're going to see away from the lights of everything. You're going to see the world that God created.
No question about it. And, I think we've noticed how our industry's picked up. And this is something I try to do, is promote this industry of ours, because I think it's so special. And notice what happened coming out of COVID. I think people faced their own mortality and the limits that they had with their family. And again, speaking of my own experience, I was able to take my boat away from the dock with my kids and get out on the ocean. It was weird. It was like, for a while there was nobody here, going down the ICW. And I remember going through Aventura, and I felt like I was in some apocalyptic.
That's a
I speak
word.
for a living, right? Movie, because there's nobody on their balconies, nobody's on the walkways, nobody's on the water. It was just the 3 of us in our boat. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. But then we were diving and saw how quickly the ocean was recovering, how amazingly quick we saw, huge amount of fish and marine life coming back. And then people started getting out there. And I remember a neighbor bought a boat. He bought the only thing he could find because he wanted one that he could get. And everybody sold out, right? And I think that was this moment of awareness where it's like, you know what? If I've got a boat, I can get out. I can get away. And of course, if you're on a yacht where you've got Starlink and you've got connections to everything, you can social distance and continue everything you need to be doing just fine. And I think that is the upside of, you can't do that in aviation very well. You got to land the plane somewhere.
You got to land.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But you can,
You can take these boats.
and you can just drop the anchor somewhere
That's right.
and near some island where there's nothing, maybe
That's
some
right.
coconuts.
Yeah.
I've thought
Crooked
about it
Island.
sometimes. What would I do if we had one of these electromagnetic things? Unfortunately, your engines don't work. But if you had a sailboat, you could make it to Crooked Island and eat coconuts and fish,
Well, then life is good. And
Yeah.
I tell you what, I think that's a great thought to kind of leave people thinking about here is that, that whole connotation about attorneys and, getting caught in traffic or running them over and saying, we don't want to go there, right? I mean, attorneys are actually good for us. We need them. And particularly here in the maritime industry.
Well, to put it in vulgar terms, it's like, I think grease is what lawyers are. Right?
Okay. Lubricating the...
Yeah, we make it happen.
We
We
make it
make it
happen.
because the gears get stuck.
Right. I love it.
And somebody needs to translate, right, what one person is saying into what the other person is saying and make it work. I remember there was a deal that was going on and it had been negotiated, and it was an Italian yard and a Central American family. And it was about ready to, the contract was ready to, get signed. But they didn't understand each other, right? And the Italian spoke Italian, the Central Americans spoke Spanish. They more or less understood, but they got stuck on some things. And it was great because I worked with Italians and I lived in Central America. So I went on the boat and they called me because they just couldn't get it done. And can you help us? And I went. And it turned out that, a couple of my nieces went to school with the Central Americans
Don't
kids.
you love that?
So all of a sudden there was an element of trust. And then I explained to them what this language meant. Oh, and then they got it, right? They got it because I could explain it to them in their language. And also they spoke perfect English. But and then I could explain to the Italian what they needed. And so we changed like 2 words, which meant exactly the same, but it got the deal done.
It was nuanced.
But you know what it is?
What's that?
Grease.
Grease.
To get the gears unstuck.
That's right. That's right. You got to put that gooey stuff in there to make it work.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, Bob, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I have so many other rabbit holes, but
let's do it again.
We'll have to do that again.
Yeah.
Maybe we do it in Cannes or Monaco.
Whenever you want.
You do an amazing job, by the way. I want to recognize you for the hospitality you do. I can't, in the years that we've been in this industry together, our paths have crossed and we've overlapped. We've never, up until the last year or two, had the opportunity to actually even really share a drink and a conversation. We've just been in different spaces, moving different directions. But I'll never forget how many times I've been in Monaco and have gone to your hospitality suite and just, stepped away for a little while and enjoyed genuine, real hospitality where I felt welcome. And Eva's good for that, but you also do the same thing here during the Palm Beach Boat Show. And I think that's worth recognizing. I think you really do a great job of showing up in this industry. People have asked me a lot, Rick, how do you get successful in this business? And I distill it down to this. 3 words: just show up.
I would agree. Much earlier in my career, when I didn't go to the Cannes show because I thought that was, for sophisticated people. I didn't go to Monaco. I started showing up.
Yeah.
And then when you show up, people see you and they say, hey, can you help me with this and that? And then the idea of the hospitality suites was simple. And it sounds kind of like I'm a jerk or something for quoting them, but there's a prayer of St. Francis. And it said, it is in giving that you receive, right? And I apply that to business because so many times you have to give and give. But you know what? What goes around comes around.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't splash on you this time, it'll splash on you next time. And if it doesn't matter.
Thank you.
But being there in Cannes, in Monaco, in Palm Beach, Miami, and Fort Lauderdale, and just saying you're welcome, because especially when you're abroad, it's like, where do you go?
Right.
And I make it easy.
Right.
Our law firm makes it easy. You just show up, we feed you, we give you something to drink, get some cool air conditioning, and you can go there with your customer and you get a deal done. Otherwise, it's a madhouse.
It is. And if you've not been there repetitively and you don't really understand how things work and how things move together, it can be overwhelming.
It is
and
really
intimidating.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And you know why I do it? It's because it was intimidating for me.
Right.
And it reminds me about the pastor of this church that I go to. You go to this church and there's free donuts, right?
All right.
It's like zillions of donuts. Right? And the pastor said, you want to know why the donuts are free and the coffee is free? Because when I was a kid, I went to a church where if you wanted a donut, you had to buy it. And I didn't have any money. Right? And so, and then I went to a church where I provided the donuts. I paid, it wasn't that much,
Right.
$50 every once in a while. And then we got some health freaks coming up, kind of like the eco freaks.
Oh boy.
And they said, oh, well, let's give them carrots and stuff like that. And
How'd that go over?
The kids, if you want kids, and actually if you want adults like me, you got to give them a donut.
Give them a donut.
And you know what?
It's an indulgence on a Sunday morning.
People come.
Right,
and
right.
if you do a hospitality suite in Connor and Monaco or in Palm Beach, you know what happens?
People come up.
People come.
That's right.
That's
right.
People like you're appreciative of what we do. And, maybe,
Totally.
Right, maybe your neighbor will just send me a piece of business. Who cares?
Yeah.
Some friend of yours will that you bring,
Right.
or some friend of his will. And you know what?
Well,
What goes around comes around.
I got to tell you, when we were running JMS Yachting, they're based in Monaco. I had their office. I set up their office here in Florida. But yeah, during the Monaco Yacht Show, we used your hospitality facilities with multiple clients. It was perfect. We had a little stand in the Darsud tent. It was a good place to kind of congregate and have a cocktail in the afternoon. But when we wanted to actually get something done, we went over to the Robert Allen Law.
Well, you're always welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking me to join you today.
Oh, this was a pleasure, Bob. Like I said, I made that list. And
It was number one. I've just been hard to get. I've been playing hard to get.
I actually,
Alphabetically, I was.
You're right, top of the list, right? I had a great yacht owner that actually was my first guy, and Bobby Genovese. I don't know if you know Bobby.
Oh yeah, I know Bobby. I've been on his boat in Monaco.
Yeah, well, he's a cool guy. We did our first interview.
Who has more fun than he does?
You just pulled his tagline. I know. It's a great guy. We actually, I did him a second time because the first one we did virtually, and that's when I realized I will never ever do a virtual podcast. They all like this in person. It's the only way
That's
it
why
works.
Joe Rogan does it in person.
That's right.
Right when one of the campaigns wanted to do it virtually, he said no way.
No,
in person.
No, that's the way. Listen, this is how it happens.
This is how you build relationships too.
Exactly true.
That's why I don't like to deal with clients that I never meet. But it's impossible not to sometimes. But it's so much better.
Yeah.
Because then you realize we're just people.
No doubt about it. With a common goal and a common ground, and I think in this industry, because it's such a uniquely beautiful niche industry, that there are so many cool people with so many great stories. And that's what I love right now, is bringing these stories out. And Bob, you and I had a great conversation earlier today. There's some stories in that one that maybe we'll bring out in the future.
Happy.
And if we can find some way to support the Mercy ship in Cannes, we'll find a way to do that, because I love that. I would love to be able to tell that story to 100,000 people.
It'd be wonderful.
Yeah, no, that's very worthwhile. Thank you for your generosity.
Really
of time.
appreciate you coming out here to see me.
What a beautiful day to be in Palm Beach too, right?
Yeah, and I want to thank the cameraman again, your son.
Tristan.
Yeah, fantastic job.
Yeah,
cool guy.
Yeah, he shows up. He really does.
All right.
He's amazing.
Thank you, Rick.
All right. And until the next time, I'm out of here.